At one of the busiest airports in America, a decorated U.S. Army colonel stood in uniform, but he wasn't flying for vacation or for business. He was on a sacred mission to bring a fallen soldier home. Yet in front of hundreds of travelers, the airline told him he couldn't board. What happened next sparked outrage across the nation and proved the power of strangers who refused to stay silent. Picture this for a moment. You're walking through one of America's busiest airports. Thousands of people rushing past you, families dragging suitcases, business travelers glued to their phones, kids running ahead of tired parents. Just another ordinary day, right? But sometimes ordinary days become extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. This is the story of Colonel Michael Washington, a decorated United States Army officer, a man who had served his country with honor for over 2 decades. And on this particular morning at Denver International Airport, he was carrying out one of the most sacred duties a soldier can perform. But what happened next would shock an entire nation. Let me paint you a picture of who Colonel Washington was. Imagine a man who stood tall, not just because of his height, but because of the weight of responsibility he carried on his shoulders. His dress uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal perfectly placed. His shoes polished to a mirror shine. This wasn't vanity. This was respect. Respect for the uniform, respect for what it represented, and respect for the mission he was about to complete. You see, Colonel Washington wasn't traveling for vacation or business. He wasn't catching a flight to see family or friends. No, his mission was far more important than that. On the tarmac outside, wrapped in the American flag that he had sworn to defend, lay the remains of Private First Class Marcus Thompson, just 21 years old, a young man who had answered the call to serve his country and paid the ultimate price. And Colonel Washington? He was going to make sure that this young hero made it home to his family in Phoenix, Arizona. In the military, there's a promise that runs deeper than rank, deeper than politics, deeper than anything else. No one gets left behind. Ever. And that promise doesn't end when the fighting stops. It extends all the way home, to the families who are waiting, to the final resting place where a hero belongs. That's what Colonel Washington was doing that day. He was keeping a promise. Now, if you've ever been to Denver International Airport, you know it's massive. People everywhere, constant noise, that kind of controlled chaos that somehow works. Colonel Washington walked through all of that, his mind focused on one thing, his duty. He'd done this before. Military escorts for fallen soldiers aren't uncommon, sadly. It's a routine he knew by heart. Walk to the counter. Present your military orders. Show your identification. Board the plane. Complete the mission. Simple, right? The airline counter looked like any other. The agent behind it, let's call her Sarah, looked like she'd been working there for years. Brown hair pulled back, tired eyes, the kind of forced smile that comes with dealing with hundreds of passengers every day. Colonel Washington approached the counter and set down his papers. Military orders, identification, everything perfectly in order. Sarah took the documents without really looking at him at first. Just another passenger in her long day. Something changed. Sarah looked up at Colonel Washington for the first time, really looked at him. And I want you to imagine this moment, because it's important. This is where an ordinary transaction became something else entirely. Her expression shifted. The professional smile flickered. There was a pause, just a split second too long, where you could feel something was wrong. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "Can I see that again?" Colonel Washington handed over his papers once more. He'd been in enough situations to recognize when something was off, but he remained calm. Professional. Patient. Sarah examined the documents again, then turned and walked to another agent behind the counter. They huddled together, whispering, glancing back at Colonel Washington, whispering some more. "Now, I want you to put yourself in Colonel Washington's shoes for a moment. You're a decorated military officer. You've served your country with honor. You're on a sacred mission to bring a fallen soldier home. And you're watching 2 airline employees treat your perfectly valid orders like there's something wrong with them. How would you feel?" Sarah returned to the counter. This time, her smile was different. Forced. Artificial. Like she was about to deliver bad news and trying to soften the blow. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but there seems to be an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Let those words sink in for a moment. "We can't allow you to board." Colonel Washington, drawing on years of military discipline, kept his voice steady. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he said, pointing to his paperwork. "Everything is in order." Sarah couldn't meet his eyes now, I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol in place and we can't override it. Security protocol? Colonel Washington asked. What policy? And here's where it gets really telling. Sarah's response? It's just policy. Just policy. Not, let me check with my supervisor. Not, let me see what I can do. Not even a specific explanation of what the problem supposedly was. Just policy. Colonel Washington had been in enough bureaucratic battles to know what this was. He'd seen it in foreign countries, in government offices, in places where people hide behind vague rules when they don't want to give you the real reason for their actions. But here, in an American airport, when he's trying to bring home a fallen American soldier, the line behind Colonel Washington was getting longer. Other passengers were starting to notice that something unusual was happening. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you saw a military officer in dress uniform being denied boarding? It's not exactly an everyday occurrence. That's when a supervisor showed up. A man in his 50s, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He had that particular tone of voice, you know, the one. The kind customer service managers use when they want you to stop asking questions and just go away. Sir, the supervisor said to Colonel Washington, I apologize for the inconvenience, but we have certain policies in place, and unfortunately, we can't override them at this time. There it was again. Policies. No specifics. No explanations. Just policies. Colonel Washington looked at this man, really looked at him. He'd been in rooms with generals, with foreign dignitaries, with people who held real power. He knew when someone was being straight with him, and he knew when they were playing games. I've flown with military escorts before, Colonel Washington said, his voice still controlled but carrying more weight now. I know the procedure, and I know there's no policy stopping me from boarding. So let's be honest. What's the real reason I'm being denied? The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. It's just an extra security measure. Nothing personal, sir. Nothing personal. Can you imagine? A man is trying to fulfill one of the most personal, most sacred duties a soldier can perform, bringing a fallen brother home, and they tell him it's nothing personal. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because while this was happening, while Colonel Washington was being stonewalled by airline bureaucracy, other people were watching. You see, there was an older gentleman in line behind Colonel Washington. Weathered face, probably in his 60s, wearing a USMC hat. A Marine. A veteran who had served his country and knew exactly what he was witnessing. This Marine had been quiet up until now, but something about what he was seeing didn't sit right with him. So he stepped forward. Sir, the Marine said to the supervisor, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in uniform. Do you have an issue with his military clearance? The supervisor looked uncomfortable now. No, sir, this isn't about clearance. We just have to follow standard protocol. That's when the Marine said something that changed everything. I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen protocol stop a soldier from escorting one of our own home. So what is it? And with those words, everything changed. Other passengers started paying attention. Real attention. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket turned to her husband and said, This isn't right. He's in uniform. A young man pulled out his phone and started typing, clearly sharing what he was seeing on social media. The atmosphere in that terminal began to shift. What had started as a private confrontation between Colonel Washington and airline staff was becoming something bigger. Something public. More people were noticing now. Conversations were quieting down as passengers focused on what was happening at the counter. And then, a young woman, maybe 25 years old, walked up to Colonel Washington. She had her phone in her hand, and her eyes showed a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Excuse me, sir, she said. I don't mean to intrude, but I want to make sure I understand. They're not letting you board. Colonel Washington confirmed that yes, that was correct. And then this young woman did something that would change everything. She turned her phone screen toward Colonel Washington and said, I'm live right now. People need to see this. In that moment, what had been a local incident at one airline counter was about to become something much, much bigger. Because once the truth is out there, once people can see what's really happening, everything changes. And trust me, you're not going to believe what happened next. I'm live right now. People need to see this. Those 8 words changed everything. In that single moment, what had been happening behind closed doors, hidden behind corporate policies and bureaucratic doublespeak, was suddenly exposed to the light. And once the truth is out there for everyone to see, well, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. The young woman held her phone steady, streaming live to whoever was watching. And let me tell you, people were watching. Within seconds, other passengers started pulling out their phones. Not just to take pictures, but to record, to stream, to share what they were witnessing in real time. "This is wrong," one man said, shaking his head as he held up his phone. "This man is literally escorting a fallen soldier." A woman further back in line raised her voice. "Hey, excuse me? Can someone explain why he's being denied?" The Marine veteran, who had first spoken up. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. This man stepped forward again, and I want you to understand something about veterans. When they see one of their own being disrespected, especially when that person is carrying out a sacred duty, something deep inside them awakens. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," the Marine said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "but I never thought I'd see the day when an American soldier, especially one escorting the remains of a brother in arms, was treated like this." He paused, looked directly at the airline staff, and said words that cut through all the corporate nonsense. "This is a disgrace." The terminal had gone quiet now. Even the usual airport announcements seemed muted in the background. All you could hear was the sound of phones recording, capturing every word, every expression, every moment of this unfolding drama. The airline staff behind the counter? They looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. The confident authority they'd shown just minutes earlier was crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. But the story was already spreading beyond that terminal. Remember that young man who had started typing on his phone earlier? Well, his social media post was already gaining traction. And then, like wildfire spreading across dry grass, it exploded. A tweet went out in bold capital letters. "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. Is this how we treat our heroes? Hashtag let him fly." Within minutes, literally minutes, that hashtag was trending. People were sharing the story, adding their own outrage, demanding answers. Veterans advocacy groups picked it up immediately. Their official accounts started tweeting, "We are aware of the disgraceful incident happening at Denver International Airport. Our soldiers deserve better. Expect action." The numbers started climbing. Retweets, comments, likes, shares. The story was spreading faster than the airline could possibly contain it. Major news outlets began picking up the story. Headlines started appearing. U.S. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Airline scrambles for answers. The airline had officially lost control of the narrative. And that's when the panic set in. Suddenly, a man in a Navy suit appeared at the counter. Expensive suit, airline ID badge, the kind of confident stride that screams corporate management. This was damage control in action. "Colonel," he said, trying to sound calm and professional, "I apologize for the miscommunication. There seems to have been an error with our system, but we're working to get you on your flight as soon as possible." Miscommunication. System error. The same corporate speak we've all heard before when companies get caught doing something they shouldn't. He offered first-class accommodations. Personal escort to the gate. The full VIP treatment. But Colonel Washington? This man who had served his country with honor, who had faced real enemies in real combat zones. He saw right through it. "I appreciate the urgency," he said, his voice still controlled but carrying unmistakable weight. "But I need to clarify something." The corporate suit nodded eagerly, probably thinking he was about to get the colonel to quietly accept their offer and make this whole thing go away. Instead, Colonel Washington asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "If no one recorded this, if no one spoke up, would I still be standing here?" Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Because everyone in that terminal knew the answer. The colonel knew it. The corporate suit knew it. The airline staff knew it. And most importantly, the hundreds of people now watching this story unfold online knew it. The answer was no. If this hadn't gone viral, if people hadn't spoken up, Colonel Washington would still be standing there being denied his flight while a fallen soldier waited to go home. "This isn't about an apology," Colonel Washington continued. "It's about accountability." And that's when something beautiful happened. The crowd around him started voicing their agreement. People were nodding, murmuring their approval. Strangers were standing together, united by something simple but powerful. The belief that this was wrong and that someone needed to say so. But the story was about to take another turn. Because while the airline was scrambling to control the damage, someone else had taken notice of what was happening. A man in a dark blue suit walked into the terminal. Military bearing. Confident stride. The kind of presence that makes people instinctively move aside. This wasn't airport security. This wasn't airline management. This was military. And he was there for Colonel Washington. "Colonel," he said, extending his hand with crisp professionalism, "I'm Major Daniel Roberts, Department of the Army. We've been informed of the situation." The Pentagon had stepped in. Can you imagine being that airline representative right now? One minute you're thinking you can smooth this over with some first-class upgrades and corporate apologies. The next minute, the United States military is standing in your terminal, taking control of the situation. Major Roberts turned to the airline suit, and his next words were delivered with military precision. "We are handling this now. Colonel Washington and the remains of Private First Class Thompson will not be flying commercial. The Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. Your transport is waiting." The U.S. military had just told a major airline, "Thanks, but we'll take care of our own." And with that, Colonel Washington's mission was back on track. But for the airline, their nightmare was just beginning. While Colonel Washington was completing his sacred duty, escorting Private First Class Marcus Thompson home to Phoenix and standing with the family as they received their fallen hero, the consequences for the airline were unfolding in real time. The public wasn't letting this story die. If anything, it was growing stronger. Stock prices started dropping. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with angry customers demanding answers. The hashtag Let Him Fly continued trending for days. Veterans organizations didn't just tweet their disapproval, they organized. Boycotts began forming. Military families started sharing their own stories of discrimination and poor treatment. Politicians weighed in, demanding congressional hearings. Legal advocacy groups filed formal complaints alleging discrimination. The story made national news, with anchors shaking their heads in disbelief as they reported on what had happened. Finally, under enormous pressure, the airline's CEO held a press conference. He called it a regrettable misunderstanding and announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave. But everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exactly what it looked like, and it took a viral video and national outrage to get any accountability at all. But here's what really matters about this story. It's not just about one colonel or one airline or one incident at one airport. This story is about something much bigger. It's about the moment when ordinary people, a Marine veteran, a young woman with a phone, passengers in an airport line, decided they couldn't just stand there and watch injustice happen. Think about that Marine for a second. He didn't have to say anything. He could have just minded his own business, caught his flight, and gone on with his day. But he saw a fellow veteran being disrespected, and his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. Think about that young woman who went live on social media. She didn't know Colonel Washington. She had no obligation to get involved. But something inside her said, "This is wrong, and people need to see it." And think about all those passengers who pulled out their phones, who shared the story, who refused to let this slide. They proved something powerful. When ordinary people stand together against injustice, extraordinary things can happen. This story spread because people recognized truth when they saw it. It went viral because millions of Americans looked at what happened and said, "This isn't who we are. This isn't how we treat our heroes." But here's the thing that bothers me, and I bet it bothers you too. Colonel Washington shouldn't have needed a viral video to get basic respect. He shouldn't have needed social media outrage to be treated with dignity. He shouldn't have needed the Pentagon to intervene for him to complete his sacred mission. Respect should be automatic. Dignity should be the default. Especially when we're talking about someone who has dedicated their life to serving others. Especially when they're carrying out a duty as sacred as bringing a fallen soldier home. But until we live in that world, until respect doesn't require going viral, until dignity doesn't depend on who's watching, stories like this matter. They matter because they remind us that silence enables injustice. They matter because they show us the power of speaking up. They matter because they prove that when good people refuse to stay quiet, change becomes inevitable. Colonel Washington completed his mission that day. Private First Class Marcus Thompson made it home to his family with the honor and dignity he deserved. The airline faced consequences for their actions, and millions of people were reminded of something important. Your voice matters. Your courage to speak up matters. Your willingness to stand with others against injustice matters. Because in the end, that's how change really happens. Not through grand gestures or political speeches, but through ordinary people in ordinary moments deciding that they won't stay silent when they see something wrong. That Marine veteran showed us how it's done. That young woman with her phone showed us how it's done. Those passengers who refused to look away showed us how it's done. And now it's our turn to show others. The question isn't whether you'll encounter injustice in your life. You will. The question is, when that moment comes, will you speak up? Will you stand up? Will you be the person who refuses to let it slide? Because if this story teaches us anything, it's that when good people stand together, amazing things can happen. And that gives me hope for all of us. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes that everyone deserves dignity and respect. Because that's how we build the world we want to live in, one voice at a time, one stand at a time, one moment of courage at a time.